Now I have a list of supplementary lead questions. Can I start with Caroline Russell, Assembly Member, please?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just want to start my timer going because we have to do it ourselves. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And good morning, everybody. I've got the privilege of starting off this discussion today, and I hope it's not going to be a bit of a playground shouting match where everyone ends up a bit covered in mud. I'm certainly not planning to join in with that. Mr. Mayor, specifically on your relationship with government, are we at risk of the negotiations for TfL funding, which you were just talking about, for the last half of this financial year, coming unacceptably close to the wire again, like they did with the negotiations back in May?
Yeah, that's a real risk. What I think is not a good idea is for us to allow our party allegiances to get in the way of what's right for our city, bearing in mind the importance of our capital city to our country's well-being. What I think is, what I'd be against is brinkmanship or waiting for the 11th hour to do a deal. Last time, as you remember, on the final day before the need for the CFO to serve the Section 104 notice, a deal was reached with huge strings attached. We know that the money we have runs out on October the 17th. We must reach a deal by September the 30th. The CFO and the new commissioner, and indeed the old commissioner, let the government know this back in May when the last deal was done. So there's no surprises. Everyone knows September the 30th is the deadline by which a deal must be done. But the bad news is negotiations only began yesterday in earnest. And that's why it's really important quick progress is made, bearing in mind we know of the impending deadline.
Well, that's really worrying to hear that, and none of us want to see that no-deal situation. I'm going to move on to the Deputy Mayor, and I think you've described it as ludicrous that fare payers are subsidising motorists in London. Now, both TfL and the government have been reviewing how to make transport for London sustainable in the longer term, and the Mayor was talking about that in his opening. Are you confident that the review proposals that are going to be discussed will make TfL fully resilient to future shocks and less dependent on fares income?
So I have said, Assembly Member Russell, that I think that it is wrong that users of public transport are in effect subsidising road users, road maintenance. We have a situation in London that we've talked about previously in the chamber here, where we are very heavily reliant on fares income as an organisation, disproportionately so when you compare London to other similar cities. So at TfL, 72% of our day-to-day operating budget comes from fares. And when you look at cities like New York, Madrid, in Singapore, Hong Kong, it's much less. And so we have to find a way to have different sources of income, some which will, as the Mayor has suggested, need to come from central government, we think, in order to find a more resilient way of managing TfL's finances. You talked about reviews that are underway. There are two at the moment. There's the KPMG review of TfL's finances that has been commissioned by government, and there is our own independent review where we've had a panel of experts over the summer considering what the long-term solutions are. There's a risk that you just look in the short term, and what we know is that the answer to this problem is not shrinking the organisation, it's not cutting services, it's not cutting staff. If you want London to recover from this pandemic, we don't know what the situation is going to be with possible future waves of the virus. You need to find a way of putting TfL's finances on a really long-term, sustainable footing. And the answer to that is not shrinking services, and we need to protect services for Londoners if they're going to have confidence to be able to move about the city.
Just briefly, when do you expect the TfL review to be made public?
So there is a finance committee of the TfL board at the end of September. And I know that finance committee members will be expecting an update on the work of the independent review at that meeting.
Thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there and I'll come back later in the discussion.